From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now, or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here's where it gets crazy. This is a long time in the making. Russian media, as well as its political power structure, offer repeated, multiple instances of ideological, nationalistic, or cultural rationalizations for gaining control of part of or all of Ukraine. We can discuss those, but we also need to note again that ideology almost always functions as window dressing for the real cause of most conflicts. And the real cause of most conflict, it goes down to stuff like access to land, access to security, access to resources.
Yeah, otherwise, why take the gamble? I'm sure we'll get into it soon, but it seems like there's some very serious consequences for what Putin is doing. So one would think that his reasons for going in outweigh the potential, ramifications of all these sanctions on, the economy of his country.
Yeah, it depends what the end goals are, and that's what we're trying to explore, right? So let's talk about some of the tools that Russia has in its belt there when it comes to what it can do to really flex on the rest of the world as it's taking these kinds of actions and seeing such pushback. The first one is one that I did not realize until, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and Ben, Noel, we had some conversations about this, but just how important Russia is to the world's supply of petroleum and gasoline.
Oh, yeah.
I just had no idea.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's one of their biggest flexes. So they control a huge chunk of the fossil fuel energy upon which Western Europe is dependent. Another tool in the belt, they have, of course, a vast stock of nuclear weapons. Not just a vast stock of nuclear weapons, but also they have the know-how and the infrastructure to deploy those in some tremendously successful ways, in theory. And we're talking about the sub-game at that point, which is sharp.
Remember the list of, nuclear gadgets that Matt rattled off early in the episode. I mean, what would the Joker say? Where does he get these toys or whatever? I mean, they've got like a ton of different things that do different things, all with one tragic and apocalyptic result.
And kind of to your point there, Ben, remember that these weapons that were traded back to Russia in 1993 were being developed from, the jump of nuclear technology up until that point. And, more, well, again, when you think about, there's no way to prove if more weapons were in fact produced in that amount of time or how many. I don't think there is intel on exactly how many types of nukes were developed or at hand right now since that time, since that large amount was traded. But as you said, the subgame is strong, and those subs carry nuclear armaments.
They very much do. And subs are tricky, or tricksy, as Gollum would say. But that's not all. Up until a few years back, one of the common arguments you would hear from Cold War hawks was that Russia's third tremendous power was their military might. And now seeing what's been happening in Ukraine, and seeing the way deployment has worked out for them, people are increasingly skeptical about that idea of a great unstoppable military force. Anyway, in concert with those powers, Russia also has clear needs, both from a domestic perspective and from a geopolitical perspective. Until climate change escalates past a certain threshold, opening up, more arable land and opening up northern trade routes right around the poles, much of the land of Russia is unfailingly, cartoonishly, take a drink, inhospitable. For the military to effectively project like maritime or naval force, they need warm water ports. They've been after warm water ports for a long time. It's a perfectly rational ambition, because warm water ports are just, they're what they sound like. They're ports that don't freeze up and become unusable for much of the year. Right now, Russia controls 2 famous warm water ports. And if you care to guess where they are.
Could it be in the Black Sea, where the Crimean Peninsula
ding,
is?
ding.
Or wait, maybe near Syria?
That's our daily double.
Double ding.
That's our daily double. Yes, that is true. They are located there. Secondly, we have to look at so we know what capabilities are there in very broad strokes. We know some of the very broad needs, but we also have to ask ourselves about the reasoning, the rationale. Propaganda aside, it's in the world of geopolitics, it's pretty rare for someone not to behave as a rational actor. What we mean by that is, even if you do not agree with the aims of a rival, you should be able to suss out their calculus, the equations, the cost benefit they went through to arrive at their stance. And the Russian government, seen most blatantly in the statements and action by Putin, does seem to yearn to restore as much of the former Russian empire as possible. While those tactics might change, the aim is clear. I remember because we've talked about this for a while, off air on our fascinating group thread, I had texted you guys and I just said, beat me here, Paul. I said, did you guys catch Putin's speech? It's fucking lit. And that's
It's been interesting watching the drips and drabs of his rhetoric that have leaked out, through Russian national television and all that we're seeing over here on the news. He does a really interesting thing where he's seated like 100 feet or more away from his cabinet, I guess you could call it. And he doesn't really take any guff. Like there's a clip that's been making the rounds where I forget who it was, one of his ministers or whatever, essentially is saying like, maybe we should give diplomacy a chance, more or less. And he just kind of browbeats the guy and essentially, heckles him until he just reverses course entirely. But I just think the distance is really interesting between Putin and like in all of these spaces. He's at the head of this giant boardroom table, and again, like 100 feet between him and his his officials. I have a theory that maybe I'll get into a little later in the next episode about why that
he likes big tables.
Very odd. And yeah, that speech was I think absolutely lit.
I like big tables and I cannot lie. Oh, sorry.
He can't lie. Or he lies all the time.
Yeah.
I said 100 feet from my allies.
No other vessels can deny. Right. The lyrics will be worth writing. Maybe we'll get on that. But yes, so it is true that you can see these speeches until hackers took down some online infrastructure from Russia. You could also see a lot of Kremlin official translations of these speeches into English, as well as essays that he had written. What we're saying is this didn't come out of nowhere. He's been thinking about it for a long, long time. Also, Noel, I believe the clip you're mentioning, I first saw it on The Excellent last week tonight with John Oliver. Yeah, so you can check that out for free online if you want to get a sense of it. And it is uncomfortable what's happening. It's tough to
not to mention that the other people that are seated are like fidgeting the whole time and just clearly terrified of the man, and not I guess you could call them sycophants. But also, like, what choice do they have? I don't know. I'm not trying to empathize with them too hard because they are in a position that requires them to be sycophants. But then if they leave, who knows what happens then? I mean, it just seems like a real catch-22 for some of those folks. But there's a lot of seat squirming and
we should mention, I don't think I mentioned this before, that clip specifically is about supporting the independence, the proclaimed independence of these 2 areas that are located in a part of eastern Ukraine called Donbass. And those are Donetsk and Luhansk. I'm just remembering that clip. So how do we know this long time in coming, or this idea of expansionist, this idea of recovering or resurrecting in some part the Russian Empire? Well, it's something we've talked about in the past a little bit. In 2008, Russia did something very similar. where they attempted to take not the entirety of a country, but some pieces.
Well, it's ridiculously similar to the current situation in Ukraine, where there are sections of a country that do want to be a part of Russia again, or at least there are strong voices and numbers of people who proclaim to want to be a part of Russia again and no longer a part of the country that they currently are, in this case, Georgia. And then Russia just really, really supports that, like really strongly. Like, yeah, that's a great idea. You should be a part of Russia.
We would have thought of that.
Well,
oh, wait.
Well, but then there's conflict between the country and, the section that wants to pull away. And Russia supports that side that wants to pull away with military might. And then there's some fighting and shelling that occurs on the borders of those regions. And then
those are what you'd call separatists,
separatist, secessionist.
Yeah. And then Russia comes in with that military might, and then it ends up becoming a full scale. I don't know what you call it, Ben. A police action, a war. It's the thing that's just under war, basically, but it looks a lot like a war.
Military operation.
But in this case, I believe Georgia did declare war when it was occurring.
Yeah, this is this is showing us that a playbook of some sort exists. And it's something that we talked a little bit about in previous episodes. Does Russia have a new Rasputin? Do check that out. We'll also see something here that doesn't get acknowledged as much because a lot of countries use it, which is, and it is a tactic that in all fairness, the U.S. has deployed in Latin America in the past, which is you surreptitiously train and supply people that you are going to send in to accomplish your goals, and then you pretend that they are independent freedom fighters, right? And you just get kind of loose and goosey and matrix dodgy when people ask you what you mean by freedom, right? Like, what are they fighting for? So that situation, that situation is out of the Russian playbook in the Putin era, definitely. And you'll also see that there is little hesitation in the Russian government, increasingly less hesitation at deploying any means necessary, all but one so far. And hopefully that's still the case when this episode comes out. All but one.
And you will recognize, as we were talking about NATO, the concept of you attack one of us, we will use every means necessary to defend that one country. It's what you're saying. Russia will do the same thing. We will do everything we can to. That's exactly what they said during the Georgian conflict. We'll do everything we can to support those who wish to separate from Georgia.
Maybe this is a silly question, but just like for some housekeeping, what are the criteria for becoming a member of NATO? Surely it's about mutual goals, mutual priorities, and also the ability to come to the aid of other member nations.
Well, it's
otherwise,
bureaucracy,
what's the point?
So things kind of by design take a long time. So if you want to join, you have to first kind of pretty much declare that you're into the idea, like, hey, I'm interested. And then if you want to join, you enter in a kind of evaluation period. You have to meet some political, economic, and military standards. So you have to uphold democracy. You got to get some human rights stuff squared away, tolerating diversity. You have to be, this is the neoliberal aspect, you have to be making progress toward a market economy. You got to let those Western banks in. You know what I mean? They want their cut. We'll talk about that later this week. And then, I don't know why that sounded like a messed up children's show.
Yeah.
But yeah. Good.
Well, Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, because the last thing that has to happen is you have to be voted in, right? So standing members have to say, yes, you may join.
Do you have to have a sponsor, like joining a fraternity or something? Like someone like puts forth their buddy nation to like join NATO, or is it all just about like literally submitting, a request, or I mean, it really does have this very like
it is a club
kind of frat vibe.
It's a big club. You have to essentially when you express this desire and then you apply for a NATO membership action plan, which is when they say, okay, let's check the democracy, let's check the human rights, let's make sure you have a market economy. The civilian forces must be in ultimate control of the military. You've got to not be waging wars. You have to be a good neighbor, not make wars on adjacent countries, much less NATO members. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and
State Farm vibes,
Ukraine had in the past expressed a desire to join NATO, but had not been formally admitted. And that, again, would have been a red line. Russia would have treated that as a declaration of war from everything they've indicated. And you'll see all this, a lot of guessing, a lot of tea leaf reading as to Putin's personal motivations. And we are in an extraordinary situation because there is one person at the helm of Russia's geopolitical decision making right now, quite honestly. And that's somewhat rare, in the US, for example, or in the United Kingdom and many, many other countries. It's not just one dude. It's not just one person saying, make it so, like Captain Picard or something. Instead, because so much of this goes down to the decisions of one person, one very intelligent, very dangerous person, there's a lot of time spent trying to suss out the inner workings of his mind. And that's not to say this is not viable or valuable exploration, but it may be more productive to measure actions and measure his own statements, right? When people show you who they are, believe them. As tensions rose, Russia did something interesting. This is another playbook move that happens a lot a lot throughout human history. Russia issued a list of demands that maybe not surprised, but definitely put Europe and NATO and the US on their heels. They said, look, NATO has to not only stop its eastward expansion, they also have to deny membership to Ukraine. Again, never, ever, ever, not once, let them in. And in addition, you got to roll back troop deployment in any countries that joined NATO after 1997. So, yeah. So why this is kind of a poison pill?
Well, it's all kind of in an effort to demonize Ukraine as well, right? Like to set the stage for, a perceived legitimate invasion. I mean, again, the invasion's the wrong word. They certainly wouldn't use it, but intervention, right? The idea of like, they're up to no good. We are policing this part of the world and we are within our rights to go in there and do something about all of their horrible, satanic rituals they're performing. I mean, I'm joking, but like also, it's just that level of like panicky kind of demonizing.
And just so you have an understanding of the strategic placement of some of these countries that Russia is speaking of, countries that have joined NATO since 1997. Here's just a short list here, especially ones that are in Europe, where you can imagine perhaps the strategic disadvantage that Russia feels by having NATO countries so close to Russia. The Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Estonia, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania, Croatia. I mean, really, like if you North Macedonia, Montenegro, they're all countries that are right in that space.
Yeah.
That Russia is interested
in. The NATO expansion is real. No one's making that part up. But if you look again at this list of demands, the reason I'm calling it a poison pill is because for some observers, this was like a broken record, or for some it was wildly ambitious, especially adding that troop rollback, right? Get us out of missile range. But this is also quite possibly an old strategy that's existed in wartime conflicts before, which is, here's the calculation. You ask for stuff that nobody is going to say yes to. And you know they're going to say no to it, because what you really want is not for them to do that. I mean, it'd be nice if they did, but everybody knows they're not going to. What you want is to have a casus belli. You want to have now a rationalization to go to war. You want to be able to go on the international stage and say, hey, look, we tried diplomacy, right? And now we have to, defend ourselves, right? Now we have a reason to be, we are being pushed into war now, really. We're not waging it. It's a war of protection. And also add to this, from Putin's statements, if you read them, he has repeatedly said, and will repeatedly say in the future probably, that Ukraine and Russia are culturally one people. A single whole is a phrase he used a couple times, and interference from the West changed that reality. He questions, or not even questions, he does not believe that Ukraine really exists as an independent country. He sees the current government as illegitimate. He's called them aggressively nationalist. He's called them fascist. He's called them Nazis. He said they exist on land that is historically and rightfully Russian. He said they never had any stable traditions of real statehood. And the condition for peaceful relations, I thought this was interesting. The conditions for peaceful relations between states, he says, on more than one occasion, is that they do not threaten the security of other states. And coming from him of all people, that might sound a little hypocritical, but from the official Russian perspective, the government is defending areas that have become self-determined, independent areas from Nazis and extremists in eastern Ukraine. Of course, maybe this is the time where we point out that if Ukraine was somehow a Nazi country, it would be highly unlikely that they elected their current president, Zelensky, who himself is Jewish.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, and
not only is he Jewish, I mean, his family, he had many family members that died in the Holocaust. I believe both of his parents fought in World War II against the Nazis. He was also a very delightful stand-up comedian. Apparently there's a bit you can find online where he and a partner play like a xylophone with their little Australias.
Yeah. Oh, what? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Talking about genitalia?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
he was a goofy, like, Catskills type stand-up comedian, like the Russian equivalent of like kind of bawdy Catskills humor.
Gotcha.
Not that precludes someone from being, a racist or a supremacist of some kind, but the guy seems all right.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I'm going to learn about that now because I have to. The big change between the past 2-3 leaders and Zelensky, it's night and day, right? I mean, Putin was able to give $15 billion to Ukraine for, to really establish some advantage there or some goodwill within Ukraine. Really relatively a few years ago, even though it was, 8 years ago or something. And now to have the leader wanting outwardly to join NATO, I mean, you can imagine that you can see why maybe there's even personal conflict there for Putin.
Yeah, again, this, it's very difficult to truly know the inner workings and mechanisms of a person's mind, but you are spot on, right? There's a clear pattern of activity here. And let's be completely honest too. There are definitely, inarguably, long-established Russian-speaking communities in Ukraine. There are cities like Odessa where the majority of people speak Russian. And that's not, the thing is that just because those people are culturally Russian or speak Russian, consider themselves Russian, that doesn't mean they also share the same revisionist view of history or yearn for the days of empire. That's a leap of logic.
I always thought Odessa was in Russia. See, I mean, I think it's just the lack of in-depth understanding of the complex relationships between these two regions and the fact there are these pockets, of ethnic Russians in Ukraine. I always assumed Odessa was Russia.
Well, so did Vladimir Putin. You know what I mean? So this is the thing. This is the thing. Russians make a lot of claims about the status of Ukraine today. And at the most extreme, there's the complete denial of Ukrainian identity. Another view is that certain parts of Ukraine aren't really Ukrainian, not when you think about it, and are only a part of Ukraine due to an accident of history. And Crimea and the Donbass are the principal Russian examples, but then those claims extend further. Places like Kharkiv, Odessa, even Kiev itself. Russian nationalists will even claim that there is cultural genocide being committed against Russians in the East, and that Russia is intervening not to invade, but to protect Russians. Did you catch that last one? You always have to be skeptical when any politician frames a conflict as a war of defense, especially if they appear to be the aggressor.
You got to be cruel to be kind in the right measure, you know? It's
Exactly.
It rings of preemptive strikes to me. But
no doubt, it's a false flag situation. I mean, it's like drumming up, you know, the optics of a problem that you then are the only ones that could possibly solve, and it's like your pretense for going in.
You know, and you guys nailed it, because it is, in my mind, it is proven that under Putin, Russia did engage in false flag attacks. Check out the apartment bombings from a few years back.